Greetings, Legionaries. I'm here at the command post, and we're stationed on the DMZ of Korea. And I'm joined with a very special trooper, Imperator Tiberius, and we're just here knocking back some Jimmy Bean with Sergeant Barnes. And welcome.
Thank you.
All right. Well, I'm really glad that you came on here for the transmission, and the subject of our discussions drunkenly over this bottle was about the ARMA 2030, 2040, the innovations in, high-intensity kinetic warfare, conventional warfare, or what is becoming the convention. And I was wanting to ask you, how do you feel about how the military in general is responding to the ascending threat on the horizon, and maybe we could just go on a branch-by-branch basis.
Right now, like the military in general, it's kind of heading in the right idea. They have the notion of what they need when it comes to, say, increased electronic warfare, increased intel, and increased cyber capability. The problem is that I don't think we can wait until 2030, because when you say 2030 to the military, it's really going to be more like 2035. It's like they're going to be like, well, we have until 2030, and then 2030 is going to roll around. They're going to be like, well, we don't have that out yet. Yeah. Here's this new thing we just decided to piss away money on, by the way. We might have that by 2050.
Yeah, I mean, it's always this case. I mean, with the modernization of the U.S. Forces, always, let's say half a decade behind. I remember, for instance, I forgot the general's name, but he was an ingenious commander, and he's the one that wrote Airland Doctrine and structured the U.S. Army and the Fulda Gap to reflect the modern innovations of his time, which when he wrote it was the early 70s. It was supposed to come into effect in the, I think it was like 75. It waited until roughly 80 before it was fully fleshed out. But for those of you who don't know, the concept of airland battle focused on leveraging the asymmetries of technology and a more professionalized force, but also weapons platforms such as the M1A1, the Apache helicopter, the new Kevlar system, the new the Bradley, for instance, which actually, the interesting thing is that the Ukraine war has bared out that actually the Bradley is good, the M1 sucks, and it's kind of strange, but it's these innovations that sculpt the future, and it's these innovations that will stay with us for decades to come, just as today we still roughly are fighting along the same lines of a doctrine that was written in the late 70s, or I guess the early 70s. So with the Army 2030, and I was listening to a lecture about like full spectrum dominance. Do you mind just giving a kind of a brief as far as what that means per se?
So the way that they want to fight now, the way that they want it to work, is this brand new idea called multi-domain operations. And in some way, it's similar to airland battle in that they want to take every capability possible and leverage that towards whatever the objective is. But the way that multi-domain operations is supposed to work is they're also supposed to have like smaller, dedicated, I think they've been calling them multi-domain task forces that include like cyber and drones and stuff like that. And they're kind of they keep talking about it as an idea, and nobody actually knows like when they're going to come around. Kind of like the mobile firing platform, I think they're calling it too, the M10 Booker. Everybody's supposed to have one. Nobody has them yet.
Yeah, I saw the profile on that thing. Gosh, it's taller than the M1. It's not
It
very
is a
low.
bit boxy. Yeah.
I mean, obviously it's a better innovation than the Sheridan. The Sheridan was a nightmare and an aluminum box, but hopefully this is better. Obviously, I'll fess up to it. I thought the Bradley was crap, and real experience has proven me extra wrong. So I'll take accountability. And by the way, for those of you who are interested, the general's name was General William E. Dupuy with Tradoc. And so basically, talking about full spectrum dominance, what it really is combined operations, combined arms operations in the era of information. And obviously proliferation of UAS. So, what I mean by that is, traditional combined arms is the synchronicities between armor, infantry, air, artillery, all that good jazz. But now with the added layers of UAS and SIGINT and signals hacking and deep operation, subversion, all that good stuff. And so the idea is to effectively bring to bear in a combined arms manner these new abilities of the military, or rather of every military, as we're seeing, because it's not enough anymore just to simply have dominance in the conventional sense, which is air dominance, and especially when you're fighting the Russians or a Russian-adjacent military pattern. Conventional forces, which are heavily AA, and they have pretty substantial, electronic
Air defense
warfare.
everywhere.
Yeah, air defense.
Air defense and EW everywhere.
Seriously,
You can, if you can put a piece of anti-air equipment somewhere, they have. It's going to be there.
I believe
They
it.
they live and die by air defense.
I believe it. I believe it.
Literally.
No, I mean it makes sense, and I mean, in all fairness, I think it's part of the fact that they were designed, and this dates back to the Soviet times, designed to counteract NATO's supremacy from the air, right? Because a lot of our doctrine it revolves around air power and air supremacy, and as we're seeing in Ukraine, there's I mean, every air platform that's not UAS is being safely guarded behind the line of contact. I mean, I don't know if you saw this, but the helicopter rate of attrition was ridiculously high in
Oh
the
yeah,
first months. I don't know
yeah.
if you saw that. I think that was ridiculous, and to say nothing, of course, of the air inserts that were disaster. And the conscript forces getting their shit pushed in, and so what we're kind of seeing is war becoming so complicated that it can only be waged by professional forces, highly trained, highly motivated, on the front line. And fires are a thing. I think that's something that I was kind of disappointed the military is finally bringing back, is the reindustrialization of the United States, because now we're seeing that we can't just be putting out a little bit of artillery shells. We need a lot of it. Um,
Yeah, it can't be just that one factory in like Scranton, and then that's
yeah,
it.
I was like,
That's all.
what were they thinking? It's like, did you know that most of our supply line, our logistical supply line for the raw materials of making munitions, comes from the PRC? I'm like, didn't you think this would be a problem? Like, think about
A
it.
lot of it comes from I think South Korea too, because they're the only nation that kind of kept their Cold War economy. So they churn out shells left and right. Everybody buys from them just because they still have the capability to make them.
Well, of course. I mean, obviously they're in this kind of frozen war with their neighbors for what, decades now, and the most surprising thing is that the North Koreans, people don't know this, but the North Koreans are super active sending military advisors since the 60s all across the Middle East, and now as we're seeing Korean soldiers being deployed in the Kursk salient of the Ukraine-Russia war, and I obviously don't think they're super effective, but the fact that they're not ineffective is a sight to behold myself. I mean, what's your opinion on that?
What the military advisors and the way that they're kind of
Yeah. Like, do you think
I
North
mean,
Korea is a
like,
problem, or do you think it's
uh,
just pushover?
they're not getting any worse. That's the main thing. They're not really getting any worse, and they've had plenty of time to dig in those mountains. So it's not in the case of a theoretical war with them. It's like, yeah, it might not be too intensive, but it also very much could just turn into like a second Vietnam. Because there's no way they haven't been digging like tunnels and building fortifications and things like that. Because they're aware they can't really defend themselves from the air.
Right.
And we should assume whatever the Chinese know, they know, at least to some extent. So they've why not do it? You know, they've had 70 years. Why not have done it?
And I mean, say nothing, of course, of the intangibles that they're super motivated. Uh,
Oh yeah,
One of the,
yeah,
I guess, maybe crazy things, because if you're brought up in the West, you think that anyone else, their life is terrible and they hate their regime. And though it is true, their life really sucks. It appears as though pain retains, and it retains the souls and the will of these individuals. And it's kind of curious because it makes you think about like where we want to take the United States, and especially you look at who made the recruiting goals. Okay, but no one tells you exactly how it is those recruiting goals were made. And first of all, lower quality, uh, you know, soldiers, Marines, airmen, all this kind of stuff are being fed through the pipeline because no one is willing to put their life on the line for a regime that is perceived to be hostile to their interests. And so the interesting thing is that the Koreans, and it seems like the Russians and the PRC don't have that challenge. Is there any kind of solutions that you've thought up in your brain noggin, your noodle, as far as
good old
head
good
that
old
off?
brain. Yeah.
Yeah.
Uh, just in terms of how to fix the culture, essentially, like how do we unfuck things?
Yeah, of course. Yeah. I mean, for me, like I think it's more than simply benefits, though I think they should retain the benefits because it's certainly one of those things that people go to the
Yeah,
military
I
for.
mean we definitely had a winning business model around the time of the Second World War, and then afterwards, where it was like benefits. It was perceived well in the culture. I don't necessarily think that uh, the army itself almost can fix the culture. It has to be that the people actually begin to perceive the military as something worth doing, and they actually have to perceive value in it. And then if regular civilians have value in it, and then they join, and nothing happens to disabuse them of this notion, then you will end up with a situation wherein the culture likes the military. The military is not sort of disliked by the culture as we have now, and nobody will ever think of cutting like benefits or pay or anything like that, because we're in this weird situation where the GWAT started, and then a year later, uh, the average person just forgot about it, just did not care until major things happened and there was the surge and all of that. But as a result of that, the culture around the military kind of just became that that's where either people who really weren't going to be anything in life went, or people who had no other option. The idea that people would just go to the military because they generally wanted to practice war isn't really something that Americans are aware of culturally. And until that's changed and they begin to perceive value in military service, I don't really think we can expect our good friends at the Pentagon to, keep that value.
Yeah, and this is actually the main crux of the arc, I guess, of this project, right? My initiative is to effectively revivify and glorify the warrior ethos and the warrior lifestyle. Because I mean, if you walk around, I'm sure that you felt this, though. Like you talk to average Americans, either it's an indifference or active, hostile, militant pacifism from obviously lib individuals, communists, and other subversives. But also, it also extends to the right, to quote unquote the right, right? Like the Christian quote unquote right. And these people, they're militant pacifists, obsessed with the individual. They want to be an individual. They want to be left alone. I just want to be left alone, and they don't value things which are intrinsic to the military way of life, or a martial way of life, which is teamwork. It's supra individual goals. It's honor, courage. All these things are maligned systemically, but also in active practice in the military. Initiatives as you may think as reasonable, such as the legislation against ostracization, or the legislation against was it hazing or something, is actually it's undermining combat readiness and the inculcation of that martial culture, and people don't understand why. They think it has to do with, oh, you're just being mean. It's like, no, ostracization is the coin opposite of honor. You have to be able to shame, otherwise you won't be able to honor, right? And so there needs to be pluses and minuses, except the kind of effeminate, weak, I don't know, zeitgeist systemically impedes that kind of action. And the challenge of the future is precisely overcoming the intangible will of towards, basically a loser lifestyle, which is, oh, I just want it for the money. I just want it for my personal advancement. And to a certain extent, it makes sense when you're in a country that, like, why is it worth dying for? I mean, like, these people, like, malign my ancestors that made this country. They, systemically, what's it called? Disenfranchise, Americans at every turn. And the economic circumstances are getting worse. So what is there left to buy in? You're supposed to believe in the post office. You're supposed to believe in the Constitution. But what is the Constitution if it's just a rule of oligarchs and libs? I mean, what's the point at that point? You know what I mean? And so I guess I wanted to pick your brain around that circumstance and just kind of go from there.
Yeah, the problem is, when it came to like the new rules against hazing and all of that, it wasn't necessarily that civilians reacted wrongly. It's that civilians were never supposed to see what was happening. That was always going to, because as soon as the internet came around and like videos of what was occurring in infantry units got out into the public sphere, like, there was going to be a problem. So that what they should have done is maybe not recorded it, what they were doing, and maybe not went too far and not crossed the line from hazing into sexual abuse.
Well, of course, I mean, there's that too, and
it's such a weird state of affairs.
There are excesses, and don't get me wrong, and that's always been historically policed. But what I would contend is that, regardless of the internet seeing what's on the inside, I think what's important is that we normalize. Because the interesting thing is that the culture is malleable. What you put in your brain as an operating system is malleable. You can change your ideals and the normalization of things. The issue is that who is in control of the internet up until recently were, lefty journalists. And lefty journalists, they hate that. They think it's mean. And so what happens is they malign it, and so they don't understand that it serves as a mechanism to leaven the warrior spirit and ethos. And what happens is that we give them undue influence when they should have no influence at all. I mean, look at Vietnam. We lost purely because of internal subversives like Hanoi Jane. And so I think what the solution is, beyond simply toning it down, instead of being reactive, we should be proactive. Proactive being, of course, glorifying it and saying, that's right, that's right. And instead of cowering to disgusting civilian perspectives about a way of life that is far better than their own. And so I don't know how you feel about that. What do you think?
I think you're on the right track. I just remember that, like I said before, the military wasn't really perceived as a valuable thing by most civilians at the time. So like you would need to change that first, and then you would need to make them understand that there are certain things that happen in militaries that need to happen,
Right.
whether or not they like them.
Right.
And then once you got them to understand those two things, you'd be fine. Whether or not that's possible, I have no idea.
I think it's possible. I think, obviously Gramsci is a communist, but he does talk about winning the culture. And the culture being, for those of you who don't know, is the aesthetic expression of values, right? It's expressed in literature, it's expressed in, arts, in the common sense, but also it's expressed in even keyboard warriors simply, fighting stupid opinions put out by these big press elements, and who are invariably controlled, institutionally controlled by these communists. And so the way I would suggest, and this is part of my project, but I also, for those of you legionaries who are listening, I suggest that you become unabashed champions of this lifestyle and everything that it entails, the good, the bad, and the ugly, and frankly to transvalue even the bad and the ugly into the good is the secret to success. Because, I mean, think about it this way. 50 years ago, you would think it's absurd. For instance, same-sex, relations, period, let alone marriage, let alone adoption of children, which is working out,
Going very bad. It's going very bad.
Yeah, let's just say that, because I don't want to get deboosted. But the point
taken out behind the woodshed and shot by YouTube.
Yeah, sodomized by the rainbow dildo. But the point that I'm trying to make is, if they're able to make something so unnatural, so intrinsically disgusting normalized, we were able to do something so beautiful normalized as well. And that just takes time, it takes effort. And the reason why it hasn't happened in the past, with the exception of Heinlein maybe, is because of the fact that, first of all, they, first of all, people that are reasonable, they usually have the self sense to focus their life on something that gives them more immediate benefit, so career, whatever. And also, second of all, they go after you if you give any opinions that are not exactly what they like. They're kind of like Idi Amin. They believe in freedom of speech, but they don't believe in your freedom after speech, right? So what does that mean? Effectively, if you're caught in person or on the internet with your face out talking about, unabashedly, like, no, first of all, liberalism is evil, second of all, the military martial ethos is great and awesome and all these things are important and good, you'll be, like, not simply ashamed, quote unquote, or whatever. They'll fire you, they'll send, criminal prosecutions against you, they'll debank you, deplatform you, destroy you, and harass your family, and not just you. And so, of course, it's designed to suppress and repress the American citizen, which is obviously wrong. And I'm glad that some things are changing there. I mean, Hegseth, for instance, is probably going to absolutely annihilate DEI, thank God, in the military. What's your opinion? What's your read on that circumstance right there?
I mean, he very much could. He has the will to do it. He has the reason to do it, but nobody is really sure what will come with that, because he's a very interesting guy. I mean, he's a very, very deeply religious man.
Uh-huh.
So there's been talk of, like, how's he going to fix the supply chain issue? How's he going to deal with, shall we say, field grade officers that are less than ideal in his view. The real question is, what else is he going to do that we're not really aware of? I think he could be very, very good, or he could be very, very bad indirectly. He could absolutely fix every single problem, or he could create 100 more.
And this is why I think it's important people understand is like collective action in the sense of everyone has to take extreme ownership and responsibility. I think this is where communists get it right, where it's not one guy going to fix it all. There's not going to be this great one Untermensch that just wields the power of Jupiter and single-handedly molds the Pentagon in his image. That's never going to happen without a team. Achilles had the Myrmidons. Alexander had his
What would be
Phalangites.
hilarious is if he just never went to the Pentagon. That'd be the real power move if he just never went there at all.
Set up shop somewhere else. Not the pentagram. He's not setting foot in that pentagram. That freaking place. The general officer, the chief of staff of the branches and the commandant, when they start talking, he inserts his index finger in their mouth, in their freaking mouth.
And he just leaves every time a meeting starts. They sit down. They're like, "Sir, we need you to sign the spending." Okay, and he's gone.
Now, what he needs to do is he needs to hollow out these general officers and many of these field grades that are communists and pinkos, just like they did to patriotic Americans in the tailhook quote-unquote scandal, which is BS. They did it as a circuitous strategy to root out actual Americans and to put in their place, people that are, lackeys, the ones that are motivated either by a Raytheon directorship or job after, or, they're motivated by, anti-American motivations and ideological convictions. And so these elements, the enemy within, the fifth red column, the red fifth column, excuse me, dyslexia, I know, but no. But in any case, I think it needs to go away. But the only way that goes away is with your help, legionaries, civilians and otherwise. Putting pressure, giving them their own medicine, highlighting the injustices that they perpetrate. If you don't do that, Hegseth is not going to have any data points to be like, this guy, Lieutenant. Let's say Schmuckatelli or whatever the hell, you're a disgusting communist. We're going to deep six you. That's it. And so you can't do that without people's teamwork. And this is something I've been trying to work and address in general, is that people think that these things are beyond your control. They're not. You have obviously a smaller sphere of influence, but you have to take extreme ownership of that small sphere for everything else to work out. I mean, don't you agree? You think so?
Oh, absolutely. I think more importantly, what's going to really determine the way that the military goes is what SES civilians are hired by Hegseth, and I think ultimately Trump is the one who signs off on those guys, because the people who actually run the military, right? Remember, the military is supposed to be under civilian control, so it's the senior executive service has a bunch of people who actually run the military. And the problem with that is that they're usually political hires. So, when Trump was in office, it was a bunch of 6'4" blonde college students. Then Biden took over, and it was a bunch of blue-haired land whales of dubious provenance. It depends on who is actually going to who runs the military. They need to make very, very good choices for their lower echelon leaders from their perspective. Anyway, I mean, for soldiers, the SES civilians are God on earth, but from the president's perspective, those are just kind of micromanagers. So they need to make good choices,
right,
on who's actually going to run the military day to day.
I think there just needs to be a huge drawdown of the officer corps. I think there are too many officers.
Oh yeah, we have too many. I think what it was that we used to have, especially the Army, there used to be Army bases all over the place.
Yeah.
And it would be no larger than a brigade. And they would just be around. So back in the day, they could have posts commanded by colonels because it was just a brigade hanging out somewhere.
Uh-huh.
And then they decided to start, gathering them together. And then they had 4 brigades, plus the sustainment brigade, plus a cab, all in the same area.
Uh,
And they were like, all right, well, now we need a general to run this. And then they made all of the bases large enough they need a general to run this. And then they just started creating 2 to 3 star commands everywhere.
Yeah, I think the interesting part is the fact that the Cold War drawdown didn't draw down the officer corps either, because you have a number of these individuals who made it through when the time of the military was huge, right? I mean, the Cold War was awesome in the sense that it was a massive army. I think that was so cool, you know, and partly because of its latent effects. And if you don't mind me going on a tangent here. I think that America should bring back conscription, or rather implement conscription as a habitual thing. You know, do 2 years of military service after high school. Everyone does it. Not necessarily for the combat efficacy of training up, you know, I guess basically trained conscript service members, but more so as a continuation of civic education. And why do I say this? Well, the Soviets did this for a very long time, and the irony is that, you know, it's a communist state, it's ostensibly a pacifist state, but because everyone had military experience and was exposed to the martial ethos, you know, in their formative years, over time the Soviet Union became very much a non-communist culture because of the military. It imparts values which are completely at odds with communism, liberalism, etc., which is, by the way, why liberals hate the military, because they understand its cultural power. And so what I want is to see an America of Starship Troopers. What do you think about that?
You're definitely correct about the Soviet Union. Even by the time of World War II, all of their top generals had just been the same guys who were talented and in charge under the Tsar. And Stalin realized that like he could get rid of the middle management he didn't like, but he absolutely could not get rid of guys like Zhukov.
Yeah, it tells you a lot, because he got rid of Tukhachevsky, but Tukhachevsky wasn't really useful, was he? It was the guys that actually are had combat efficiency and actual like stars on their freaking chest that were well earned, by the way. From, you know, for instance, Zhukov was severely bangled by the Second World War. This guy's a hard charger. I mean, just as an individual, like, I don't like communists, but you have to admire the personal guy. Like, I mean, the guy's a great military commander, very successful, hard as steel. I mean, that's exactly the kind of general officer I want to see. I don't want to see what the crap that's going on in the Pentagon for the last 40 years. It's disgusting.
If you read about his meetings with Patton towards the end of the war, Patton wanted to kill Zhukov so bad. He wanted to fight that man every single time. Every time he ran into the Russians, he was ready to rumble. And he nearly did it.
You know, I bet that's why they offed the OSS, the commie-occupied precursor to the CIA. I bet that's why they had to off him, loosen his brakes, because ultimately he was so important. And he was the reason why that he knew the true enemy were the Soviets. And, at the time, I don't know if you had the pleasure of reading Sean McMeekin's Stalin's War. Have you had the opportunity?
No, I have it, just haven't been able to read it.
Oh, you got to read it. It has all the receipts, but it just goes into even the pre-war era of the 20s, 30s, and obviously, the 40s, the early 40s before 41, talking about how at the highest echelons, the United States Republic was institutionally captured by communists everywhere. And obviously this was before all the information of the Ukrainians and, all the negative externalities of communism made itself manifest. Were made public. And so, that's the interesting thing, is that, Patton's instinct was correct, that the true enemy was the Soviet Union all along. And we made a huge mistake in giving them, first of all, aiding and abetting communism in general, but second of all, giving them lend-lease. I mean, if it had been the case, even if it were the case that the Germans had managed to vanquish the Soviet Union, we would have still defeated them, because at the end of the day, like, the Germans in World War I did the same thing. They were able to vanquish the Russians and get them to capitulate in 1917, but that didn't actually make any difference logistically, or they would still have been overextended and outmanned, outgunned.
Well,
So
Ludendorff made a series of mistakes with like what he did with his newfound combat power, in that he kept he I think Hart covers this on his book on strategy, but the main idea is that Ludendorff looked at the line, and rather than concentrating against strength, which had been his plan, he he planned to concentrate against the weak points in the Allied line, but when he actually distributed his forces, he just distributed them in the same way they had been doing. He had the right idea, and then he just didn't do it,
so it's a
more or
problem of
less.
execution. So good judgment, bad execution.
Yes.
Yeah, it sounds, it's interesting because I'm not really that well read in World War One. It just seems like I mean, the Eastern campaigns are interesting, and there are a lot of interesting campaigns that were waged on the Eastern Front just because it was more fluid. But I mean, it just goes to show that history is not this fated thing, and especially if we study history, we think it happened as a matter of course, and that's a false statement there, because even though it's the case that yes, there are probabilities, but probabilities don't mean it's like Schrodinger's cat, except Schrodinger's war, right? Things could go whichever way. The fates, the furies intercede. The gods give their blessing on certain men, and others revealed to be slaves, and so on. Heraclitus. But the point that I'm trying to make is, like you can't just simply calculate combat power on a linear line of logic. And this is why I like Edward Luttwak. I was just reading previously from the book Strategy, talking about the paradoxical logic of warfare, and how basically the asymmetry of warfare, that first of all, warfare is an irrational phenomenon in the sense that the actors on both sides are humans, and humans are irrational, and they make a tool of rationality. But also you can leverage asymmetries, which means to say that you can leverage the paradoxical thinking of humans, which is irrational, to secure victory when otherwise it should be certain defeat. Instead of matching strength against strength, you go for the Schwerpunkt, which is obviously what Ludendorff wanted to do, but he wasn't able to do in practice. Or, I call it blitzkrieg. I don't know why there's so many, purists or whatever. It's blitzkrieg now, okay? America owns it, all right? You speak American now, okay? It's not English. The point that I'm trying to make is, I think in military, the history of military and history in general is like, it's all entirely up to our agency, our ability and agency, and a lot of that is completely irrational and comes down to the will, to the heart, and matters of our own mind. I mean, what's your take on that?
Yeah, I definitely think it's kind of interesting that there are a lot of blitzkrieg purists, especially when they're Germans, because you can just be like, "Oh, I'm sorry, where do you come from again? The Allied occupation zone, that one, that place." No, but it's definitely how a kind of like a interesting topic that yes, Hitler absolutely had a very innovative army for the Second World War, and he could have, had we not propped them up, thrown the Soviets out of the war. But that doesn't. He still wouldn't have been able to actually capitalize on it, especially as he had no navy to speak of by that point.
Yep. I mean,
His biggest ship was down chilling in the sand dunes.
or atomic
He
weapons.
had
I mean, over a long enough timeline, we would have had atomic weapon supremacy over them. I mean, that's the thing that
yeah. Yeah,
Um,
I keep hearing that like that people are convinced that Hitler might have had them first, and it's like maybe he could have maybe he could have pulled it off. I don't know though. Yeah. Also, just I don't even know what Hitler would have done with atomic weapons. I don't really think who would he have hit. Like the French. Would he have hit Paris?
British.
Maybe.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, maybe the British. I don't know. Who knows? But I
Could
mean,
he have even gotten to Britain by that point though? Because by that point, I mean, the Luftwaffe was like almost non-existent. There were more Luftwaffe personnel in those like stupid infantry divisions they had,
you could put
as
on
opposed to
a
like
super
actual.
rocket. You could put on a ballistic missile. I guess,
You could.
as an ICBM type situation there, maybe. Um, but yeah, no, I agree with you. I think that the odds were sorely stacked against him. Even if it were the case, hypothetically, he threw the Soviets out, crushed the Soviets. He didn't have the R&D. He didn't have. I mean, I just think that there was such a narrow way that he may have won. Had it been the case that Churchill hadn't come to power and FDR wasn't captured by the communists, I doubt that they would have waged war over Poland, because it's a totally fake country, by the way. I hope you know that. But the thing is that, like, I think it had to do with the political. And the interesting thing, and the allusion to our present, is the primacy of information warfare and hybrid warfare in shaping our decisions. And we're coming to the point in, I guess, this new iteration of warfare, or at least its new emphases, right? Because all these elements are eternally present. I mean, you can go back as far as Caesar and see all these principles at play, but with different, let's say, emphases, right? Obviously, they didn't have the capabilities we have today, but what we mean by hybrid warfare of today is that there's a special critical vulnerability and center of gravity surrounding information. And we talked about this, like, in brief about the journalists and stuff, but it's deeper than that. Take, for instance, Ukraine. When we did a color revolution in Ukraine, that came from decades-long, brainwashing, exposure to American media, capture of, government officials, bribery, whatever it may be. Things that, we ascribe only the bad, quote-unquote, nations to do. Everyone does it. It's just a matter of, how do you say, the efficacy of that warfare. How do you see hybrid warfare fleshing out in the, I guess, not so distant future?
It depends entirely on what the people at the time feel towards it. Because if it's a war that everybody is wanting, if it's a war that everybody is hot and ready for, then it could actually turn into like an actual war, as opposed to a police action by other name. Like, for instance, right now the Germans have been moving, like, the Patriot air defense systems into, like, southern Poland, because they want to be able to use them, for air defense. The only issue being that it's not that they actually care if a missile hits the Ukrainian migrant facility. They just don't want to be. They have two options: either they can donate their Patriot systems, or they can find a use for them.
Right.
So they're going to put them there. So it's more so performative, which is an equally important part of information warfare. Is how does the government use the assets it has to give a certain impression that gets its people to shut up about things?
The interesting thing is that, people, especially in Eastern Europe, obviously resent the Russians for their Soviet legacy, right? Obviously, like, the nature of the Russian conquest of Eastern, not Ukraine, but Europe in general, was pretty brutal and pretty brutish, if that makes sense. But the Americans, like, I love hearing these EU politicians talk about their countries as if they have a choice. It's curious because
it's a very
these people are subjects, and it's funny that they think they have a choice. And I'll get to my point, but the point that I'm trying to make is this is also a branch of shaping perceptions, i.e., information warfare. And so what does that mean is basically it's how you shape perceptions of the body politic, of the people in charge of those countries. If you give people the illusion of not being under someone's dominion, that is a force multiplier in consolidating political control. People say that the era of annexation is over. I truly disagree with that. I mean, it's not just Russia doing it. We're going to do it. I mean, we're doing it. We have extensive territories in the Pacific, in the Caribbean, and other places. But there is something to be said about having, stooge governments that are really just, America Part 2 territories. and with the illusion of freedom. I mean, what's your take on that? Have you seen the recent debacle on Twitter about these Euro politicians thinking they can actually have their own say as if there are equals?
Oh, absolutely. It's like, oh, bother, the imperial provincials are acting up again. It's kind of like, what are they going to do about it, though? What are they going to?
Yeah, what is the UK
They're
going to
gonna
do
they're gonna
about it?
sanction us?
Yeah, like
Like what?
what is the UK gonna do about it? Maybe they're gonna leverage their like dark empire, their finance
Their
empire.
one war fighting division?
I'm not even talking about their kinetic
Yeah,
ability. I'm talking about their like soft power in the form of
yeah.
intelligence agencies, and of course, closely aligned is their financial departments. And I'm like, well, that would make sense, but you don't like we can just find your network and liquidate them. Like that's the thing is they don't realize that. They think that they have this trump card, but we have like we have like 17 aces of spades in our sleeves, It's like no, dude, like you can't do anything, and if we wanted to, like we would annex airstrip 1. Like are you joking? Like are you serious right now? There's no deference. But I think that era has changed because appearances can't be kept up anymore. I think Europeans are realizing this. I think they've realized this for a long time, but Americans are too. And I think it's the realization that we're re-emerging into an era of empire, much in the way of Napoleonic France or something like that. Or maybe the Great Game or something, like the Great Powers and so on of the
Yeah,
1800s.
it will. I think Arctos ran this article back when Charles became King of England, where Charles went on kind of a tour, essentially, of the provinces that still matter to the British Commonwealth, which is just the empire by a nicer, more liberal mean, you know. And I think he went to Canada, Australia, New Zealand, stuff like that, right?
Right.
And the point of this article was kind of that it was like, yeah, he's playing the game, but it's just British Empire business as usual. That's the point. They don't really care how they keep these countries in the Commonwealth as long as they stay. So I think what's going to happen is there's going to be a significant sort of turn towards that, where depending on who's in charge of the country, they're still going to be playing imperial games. They're just going to be doing it with liberal terminology.
Yeah, I agree, and I think the first duty here at Lance Legion is to dispel the illusions, right? Because all it is obfuscation. It's a lie well crafted, because it appeals to our vanity. It appeals to what we want, not necessarily how things are. And the truth is that a lot of these liberal powers are doing exactly the same things that every other country does or power does, which is suppress dissident speech. As you can see, Keir Starmer, he's like he emptied out the prisons of rapists and murderers and put in the prison dissidents. I think it's like 10,000 people. It's insane. It's absurd. But the interesting thing is that they're completely ideological. And so if you're able to dispel the ideological premises by which they couch their legitimacy on, so for instance, liberalism being, of course, freedom of movement, freedom of speech, freedom in general, and point out that they're doing everything but that, I think that you can startly see the liberal order unraveling. And I mean, it's been happening for as a protracted thing since 2003, when people just start disbelieving in it. What's your take on that kind of meta-political innovation, or rather, I don't know, development, so to say?
I mean, like I keep coming back to, I think it's going to depend ultimately on what the people can be driven towards and what they want. Because we very much could get rid of this sort of liberal order and the ideas that come with it, but only if enough people are aware that that's an option, even.
Yeah, I think it's in America, for instance. I think it's so baked into what people think America is that it's a lot of cultural work that will have to be done to dispel the fact that this is actually something grafted onto us. Not even as early as '76, but 1965 is really the paradigm we're living under. The Great Society and all that kind of crap. And if you're able to show people there's an alternative, that's not tyrannical, that's not obviously like crazy, like no one's advocating for a totalitarian, retarded society in the vein of Soviet Union or DPRK. What we're advocating for is a return to sanity, and the traditional, or at least the true essence of what America is supposed to be. And
we're looking to get rid of the French Revolution, more or less.
Exactly.
It's a very long-winded way of saying, look, that Robespierre guy, nah, get rid of him. Get him out.
Guy. Yeah, I hate that guy. I was reading recently this book by Simone about the French Revolution. I don't know if you have that copy or not, but gosh, every time I read it, I have to put it down in anger what they did to the French nobility. But in a way, the French nobility fucking earned it. Okay, let's be real here.
Nietzsche has an entire section on this in Beyond Good and Evil, where he's like, "Look, they did it to themselves.
Exactly.
They made it their problem when they kept giving up their rights. That was just the logical conclusion."
Dude, not only that, but they were subsidizing intellectuals. They were cultivating the very serpent that destroyed them. And it's like, obviously it requires a certain level of intellectual dedication and power and spiritual power to be able to reimagine a future. And I think the challenge is, in 2,000 years, there hasn't been, until Nietzsche, of course, there isn't this reimagining of what the first principles, the first interests of life are, right? What is life? We still think that it's about simply the dignity of labor and the dignity of X, Y, or Z, of average Joe, and the secret sauce is revealing to them, and they know this every day of their lives, but every peasant wants to subsume it in lies, but is dispelling these lies, which is average life is lame. The point of life is not merely to exist, it's to become the best, excellent, most full expression of yourself. In other words, it's to become Hellenes. What do you think about that? A Hellenic America.
That was definitely kind of what the founders had in mind. If you read their correspondence, they really wanted another ancient Greece and Rome, and they just didn't get it, and they were very angry.
Yeah, we got Carthage. We got Carthage. Oh my God.
Yeah, we get.
Yeah, no, you read the Federalist Papers and de Tocqueville, for instance, and it talks about the salubrious, not impulse, it's the influence the military could have into an American society, that we could bound up freedom with, basically a more regimented, responsible average citizen, inculcate him with agency and a sense of the good and the bad, in an Aristotelian sense. But we haven't done that. We have become slaves to this idea that everyone, everything is fair game. And what's worse is you lose when you become a liberal, and you lose again when you're a Christian, because they all at base share the exact same convictions at core, right? I don't think that's controversial. You think that's controversial?
No.
Okay.
No.
Perfect. So, the greater point that I'm trying to make is what requires of us is going to be a titanic cultural impetus. Not simply to change the politics of the day-to-day, which is very myopic, but to become the wave by which other people surf, which is to say, to create a completely different vision, a more beautiful, more intense vision of life, what it could be emanating from at the depths. And obviously I start here at Lance's Legion, and I take a lot of inspiration from Heinlein, but even Heinlein was only scratching the surface of what we mean. Do you have any suggestions as far as like first principles that we should either cast off or we should inculcate?
I mean, I think Evola wrote it pretty well when he at length discussed the fact that the sort of Protestant work ethic is not doing America any favors. Now, granted, I think the Baron would have dropped dead if he had ever said anything nice about America. So we have to kind of take what he says with a grain of salt. But he's not necessarily wrong in the sense that if you base it on Protestantism, when it really comes down to it, you're going to get something that's very disorganized and doesn't really have a sense or a respect for hierarchy or for the exceptional.
That's something that I keep on getting back to is I really don't like it when people call it hierarchy because that's a latent effect. What's implied in a hierarchy is a stratification of excellence, right? Because just as you see in tournaments, whether it's MMA or, a foot race or whatever it may be, there's always a champion. There's always the best. And there's I guess, stratification of ability and virtue throughout society. I mean, I think this is where the Platonists have it right: is that there are emanations and levels to this, to existence. And the funniest thing is that Americans have this weird, strange, slavish devotion to this concept of being equal. But remember, those who believe in equality are the most inferior. And ultimately, I think that's the first holy cow to slay is the god, the false god of equality, because nothing could be further from the truth. Nothing could be further from the truth. And once we start, affirming that, which is affirming excellence in itself, we'll start to be able to reason our way down to, okay, so what gives rise to excellence? And in your mind, what comes to mind as like personal virtues which man can imbibe, which overcomes or at least approaches excellence in his own life?
I don't really think that we can disagree with Aristotle when he mentions that you need courage before you can have any of the other ones.
Exactly.
That's going to be the primary one that people need, because it comes back every so often on Twitter. It's like that 4chan green text where the guy talks about the fact like how different how people make decisions based on different testosterone levels. And he mentions the fact that like high testosterone males and aneurotypical males, so like autists, they judge claims based on whether or not it's true.
Right.
Whereas, at least in his conception, women and lower testosterone males instead kind of run it through a consensus filter.
Right.
So
they're
if
over-socialized, that's the challenge.
Yes.
Yeah.
So if we can start putting a little more backbone into people, really give them a sense of courage where you can point out to them where it's like, no, you don't actually have to agree with everything under the sun that this particular group of people says. You don't have to think your ancestors were horrible people because they were a bit racist. You don't have to, if you can successfully convince people to stop agreeing with these assertions, they might be fine.
It's interesting that you say that. And fear, right? What is fear? What brings on fear? I mean, the curious thing is understanding what fear connotes, right? It's the idea of ostracization, obviously the fear of losing your job, the fear of losing your freedom, of your life, and many other things. And I think this is why I like Nietzsche, because in a way he's a stoic, but a hard stoic, a hard-charging stoic, a fighting stoic, He's not a tutto passa stoic, he's a menefrego stoic, And the reason why I say this is that ultimately the reason why cowardice exists is because everyone's a coward, and it takes a man of courage to not simply take a stand, but also willfully take the hits and maybe even lose everything, his life, his freedom, his property, because at the end of the day, it's the kingdom within that matters the most. And I think a lot of Christians can at least agree with that. What use is, the earth if you lose your soul in the process? And I think that's an incredibly powerful thing to say. And getting away from materialism and its affects, which is of course calculating based on not simply material gain in wealth, but also the material emanations of repercussions. So being afraid of being ostracized, being afraid of pain, being afraid of death, is something that you have to overcome. And the way you overcome it is by realizing that the victories and defeats that truly matter are the ones that you have absolute control over, and that's within yourself. And so it may be the case that your life may be struck by tragedy due to the fact that you are a true believer, a myrmidon of Mars, so to speak. But you'll see it, and it bears out in war, that courage actually begets victory more often than it ever has accrued defeat. And that if people just saw and acted and believed in courage, and were unrepentant and unpiteous about their ideals in this life, you'd start to see that life molds itself in its image. So what does that mean? The spirit, the will comes first. The soul comes first. Conquer your soul, and you can conquer the rest of reality. And if I may proffer one last one, and I'm glad that we're kind of talking about this, but honor. Concept of honor. For me, honor is not simply what you think is being in good repute, or what the military thinks today as being of good repute, which is kowtowing to the disgusting civilians and communists which exist and leverage their mechanisms of shame on people. But honor is something deeper than that. It's the debt you owe and good standing you owe to not simply ancestors, but to your progeny. Not to yourself, but to your fellows, to your country, to your patria. And what does that mean? It means putting your ego in something supra-individual. And Thomas Aquinas would call this the kingdom of heaven, right? And to fight for the kingdom of heaven on earth. I think this is where communists actually have an edge, is because they don't care how many times they fail, whether it's the Soviet Union or the PRC or Pol Pot.
They're still convinced the same revolution is ongoing.
Yeah,
like it's if you read like their literature, if you ever saw like the stuff put out by that horrible woman from New York City, Nikki.
Which one?
the damn Hegel reading one.
Oh,
she was prominent on X for a while. No, and like if you looked at like the notes she would post, no, they're convinced that it was the same revolution. It's never actually stopped.
Exactly.
It just kept on going. Same revolutions.
Yeah, and you need that same fanaticism though. But the revolution, the cultural revolution that, if I may be so bold, me and Tiberius and I offer, or we call to arms or call to action over, is a revolution from above. A revolution of what is best in man, not what is most low or most common, but what is exceptional. And the way that you do that in your everyday life, Legionary, is by always striving for excellence. And where you can't achieve excellence, you will always honor excellence in other men and women. I mean, it's not just simply trying to achieve it for yourself, but to actually champion those who unrepentantly, unabashedly admire and defend those who are the best. And I think that's where it starts, is because people think, that's lame and that's cringe to admire someone who's better than you because you're admitting that you're inferior. It's like, no, I am confident in my potentiality, and therefore I come from an abundance of spiritual wealth in which I can offer up as a admiration, because it's not just simply that you're honoring something in someone else. You're offering the ideal which has a propensity, a potentiality in us all. And if you're able to do that in real life, if you're able to get others to believe in that same thing, we can make America into what it was birthed to be, the land of excellence, the land of great men and women, titans on this earth. And without further ado, I think we're coming here at the end of this transmission. Sergeant Barnes is glaring at me, telling me I have to walk the fighting positions in foxholes, and he's a good NCO, but god dang, his steering.
Have to move the foxhole 5 meters to the left out of a flood zone.
Exactly. So if you have any parting remarks that you'd like to leave to the Legionaries, let me know. Let us know.
Read Nietzsche and Aristotle, and then read them again. And then throw a brick through your local gay bookstore. I don't know.
Don't do that. Don't do that.
Don't actually do that.
We don't advocate for anything illicit. But
no, nothing. We're a very peaceful movement here at
Unironically, though, but the point that I'm trying to make is he's absolutely correct. And Tiberius, if you do me the honor in the future to come back on, and maybe we can talk about Aristotle more fleshed out.
Absolutely.
And I think the classics are the kernel of what we're trying to achieve. And well, I really appreciate you coming on, brother. Thanks for making your way out here to the DMZ. And we'll look for you next time. Sound good?
All right.
All right.
All right. See you then.
This is General Lance, Sergeant Barnes. This is the War Room, signing off.